Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode and Daylight. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How's it going?
I'm doing all right. How's it going with you? You've been still deep writing away on your iOS review?
Still typing, still writing, still doing research. But I think I would say 80%, 75% done. So it's
All right.
really, really good progress this year, really good writing pace. And I'm really happy with with how things have been going. So I'm right on schedule, I think. So I'm starting to feel a little more relaxed because the couple of chapters that are still left to write are the easy ones. And I did all the more difficult ones and, especially shortcuts. I did it over the past 2 weeks. So now I got the entire month of August to finish the last few things of the review. So it's looking good, I think.
Fantastic. Well, last week we spoke about PDF apps, and I'm not surprised we got a lot of feedback on that because there are so many PDF apps out there, and there's a lot of different ones and a lot of good ones, frankly. And I thought we'd do a little follow-up and talk about a couple of the ones that we heard about from readers and one that just got updated since we did the show, which was... we released our episode on Monday, and then Wednesday, PDF Viewer went out and did a major update, which I reviewed on Mac Stories this week, and it's really nice. It's an in-app purchase pro pack that adds all sorts of, I guess you'd call them advanced editing and collaboration tools. So they're not tools that everybody needs, but if you are a heavy user of PDFs, you might find these things attractive.
Yeah, I'm really keen to play around with the new pro features of PDF Viewer because I really like the app and the way that it integrates with the iOS 11 document provider, document browser. So I wanted to mention this new app that I discovered just accidentally a couple of weeks ago, and then it turned out that it got this major update just a few days ago that I was not aware of. The app is called the Margin Note. It's a single word, and it's this combination of a PDF viewer and something like liquid text, where you can do a bunch of things with annotations and highlights. And one of the many features of the app is the ability to extract all of your highlights from a PDF document, present them as a mind map. So you can create your own mind map based on annotations and highlights. And you can structure the mind map with topics and branches, and you can have a child node as a topic nested within another topic. And then when you're done assembling this mind map, you can export it to iThoughts directly, which is the mind mapping app that I use to put together my longer stories, including the iOS review. And there's so many features in Margin Note, and version 3, there's a YouTube video in the show notes that you can click to see all of the new design and the new features. It's more skewed toward research and students and people dealing with long PDF documents that span hundreds of pages.
Right.
But I needed to extract, I would say, about 50 to 60 highlights from this long document that I had about iOS 12, and I was able to build a mind map out of my highlights and export the mind map to iThoughts, and it was perfect. So definitely recommended. I think there's a free version if you want to play around with it. And it's one of the apps that I was not aware of until we did the show. A couple of listeners also recommended Voice Dream Reader, which is, I think, a more of a accessibility-focused PDF utility that allows you to listen to the text from PDF documents, which is kind of what I wanted. I'm definitely going to check it out when I have a PDF that I need to listen to. And also Weekend Read. Weekend Read is more oriented toward people who need to read screenplays. So whether you're an actor or a director and you have a screenplay, you can import it in Weekend Read, and it's going to reformat it for you, and it's going to make it easy for you to scroll through the different pages and scenes. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, this didn't work for me as I was expecting, because when I imported the PDF into the app, it didn't find any text inside the PDF. So, and also I noticed that it didn't have a native integration with files. You need to use the copy to menu via the share sheet. Oh,
right, yeah.
Because there's not a native file speaker. There's a Dropbox speaker that uses the API to authenticate with your account, but I was surprised that there's no files integration. But if you work in Hollywood, or if you're making movies, if you're an actor, this sounds like a very promising utility. And finally, John, I know that Mr. Michael also recommended something else for PDFs.
Yeah, he just wanted to point out to me, and I think it's a point worth making, that the built-in, at least if you're on a Mac, the built-in preview app and print to PDF are both good options. And that's something that I use really every week. Anytime I send out some sort of sponsor agreement, what I do is I print it from Word, and then I print it to PDF, and I just open it real quickly in Preview to paste in a little signature. So it's something I do all the time, and it's just like a little mini workflow that I have, and it works perfectly well in those apps, which are defaulted on your Mac already. So you can. There's a lot that is available in Preview, and it's worth not forgetting it, I guess. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you'll have access to a suite of powerful hosting options with prices starting at just $5 per month. And you'll be up and running with your own virtual server in the Linode cloud in under a minute. You really can't go wrong with saving both time and money. It's a perfect combination. Linode has hundreds of thousands of customers who are all serviced by their friendly 24/7 support team. You can email them, call them, or even chat over IRC in the Linode community. They know how important it is to get the help you want. And they also have a suite of amazing guides and support documentation to give you a reference when you need it. Linode's intuitive control panel will also allow you to deploy, boot, resize, snapshot, and clone your virtual servers in just a few clicks. And they feature two-factor authentication to keep everything safe. On top of that, Linode guarantees 99.9% uptime for server availability. Once your server is up, they keep it that way. Linode offers additional storage too. Block storage is now out of beta and available in Fremont and Newark. So what can you do with Linode? The answer is a ton of things. You can host a large database, run a mail server, operate a VPN, run Docker containers, host a private Git server. The list just goes on and on. And guess what? Linode is hiring right now. If this interests you, go to linode.com/careers to learn more. Okay, so Linode has fantastic pricing options too. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for only $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting with 16 gigabytes of RAM. As a listener of this show, if you sign up at linode.com/appstories, you'll not only be supporting the show, but you'll be getting $20 toward any Linode plan. That's a great deal. I mean, on the 1 gigabyte RAM plan, that's 4 months free. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's really nothing to lose. So go to linode.com/appstories right away to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of their $20 credit. Or use the promo code AppStories2018 at checkout. There'll be a link in the show notes. Thanks so much to Linode for supporting the show.
All right, so the topic that we have today is an interesting one in that it's been sort of a debate for the past couple of years, really, especially when it comes to iOS and the iPad Pro. And it's the idea of what makes an app a Pro app. So what exactly are the aspects that lead us to define an iOS app or a Mac app as a Pro one, as an application geared toward Pro users? And this is an interesting topic for me because, I mean, it directly affects the iPad Pro and the way that I think about the iPad Pro and iOS. But also, I think it sort of extends to the Mac as well, especially given, the recent controversies surrounding the MacBook Pro and what Apple has been doing with Pro users on the Mac. And I kind of wanted to hear from you, John, so I have this list of this metric that I use to judge a Pro app on iOS. But I wanted to ask you, what's your take on the whole Apple and its relationship to Pro users and Pro apps and Pro hardware?
Yeah, I'm glad we decided to do this topic because I knew this is one that you would have a lot to say about. And it's one that I've been thinking about and turning over in my head a lot over the last few months, especially as we've had all these controversies on the Mac side with the hardware, with the MacBook Pro, as well as, the ongoing debate that's really been around since the iPad was launched practically, but has really heated up with the iPad Pro, which is what software is considered Pro, whether it's on iOS or the Mac. And, when I think about it, first of all, just looking at it from the hardware standpoint, for instance, with something like a MacBook Pro, it strikes me that there are two different aspects to this. There's the power of the machine and there's the flexibility of the machine. And those are two, I think when you break it down that way, you can analyze hardware or software really kind of in the same way. Because on the one hand, the MacBook Pro has top-end hardware in it in terms of the chips, the GPUs, all that. These are the laptops with the best specs in the lineup. On the other hand, they're not the most flexible either. I mean, we've got is USB-C. You know, with the advent of these computers, we lost a lot of ports, things like SD card readers and USB-A and HDMI. Lots of different kinds of ports went away. And so it causes this debate, I think, amongst users raises the question, is it the power of the machine that makes it a pro machine, or is it the flexibility of the machine? And I think you can see some of the same things pop up in apps too, right? So you look at something like Ulysses maybe, or any text editor, maybe Scrivener too. Those are both not super powerful in the sense that you're not going to max out the cores on your MacBook or iPad by typing text. On the other hand, they're also very flexible, and I think we'll get into some of the nuances and you know the factors that you've come up with as we talk more. But it strikes me that it's that balance between power and flexibility that kind of defines what is pro, and it's different for different people, which is why there's this continual debate, I think, too, because people have different needs, obviously. Some people may need to render complex animations, while others just need a text editor that's super flexible, which maybe it's just pro in a different way. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, totally. I think it's interesting that how you define sort of flexibility and not necessarily power, especially when it comes to something like you said, like a text editor that it doesn't necessarily, you know, when you're using something like Scrivener or Ulysses, it's not like you're pushing the GPU to do something crazy, insane things, but you're still using a pro app, even though it's not about the power, it's more about the controls that it gives you, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm getting at. So, I mean, I know that this is something that you've thought about a lot. And you know, I don't think you and I have ever really talked about this directly. I mean, I think if you read your writing day to day, you probably have a sense for where you come down on some of these things and some of the factors that you look for in a pro app. But I thought it would be really interesting if we could kind of pick your brain and go through what are some of the things that you think make a pro app. I think we'll focus on iOS since that's where you do most of your work. But I think these factors apply equally to anything on the Mac as well.
Yeah, I think over the years that I've been reviewing iOS apps and working on the iPad, and especially since 2015 with the iPad Pro, I think I've sort of identified certain aspects that I used to judge whether I'm dealing with the Pro tool or not. And maybe they're not aspects as much as they are common traits between apps that I use and that when I'm using them, I think, well, I can see why the developer thinks of this app as a pro app, as a pro tool. And I'm going to go through this list of, I've been thinking about these few points. And the first one is, I think it's really the most important one. Do people that use this app rely on it for their most important work? When you're using pro apps, when you're dealing with content creation, whether it's audio or video, or really even if you're a writer and you're writing a novel, these are the pieces of software that people are using for critical tasks, for to do the most important work. And when a developer works on this type of app, I think you can see, for example, in the presence of multiple backup options or the ability to export your data in multiple formats, I think you can see why developers of pro apps are aware of the fact that people trust them with their most important stuff, with their most important work.
Right.
And so you can see, for example, in apps like Devon Think on the Mac or iThoughts and maybe even Margin Note, which I just mentioned, or the new drafts, they give you different and customizable backup options, multiple features to make sure that you can always export your data. I mean, if you look at drafts, I literally built an action for my review that backs up the review in 4 different locations with a single workflow in drafts. So the idea of I'm trusting this app with my work, with the work that I release onto the world, and I make money off of this work so that I can pay rent.
Right.
I think it's important for developers to make sure that people can trust the software to not lose data and to always allow them to export their data in multiple formats in other places.
Yeah, I would add too that I think pro apps tend to have a lot of ways to get information into the apps too, right? I mean, I especially think of something like DevonThink where it will sync with all sorts of, whether it's web dev or Dropbox or iCloud or whatever it is. There's lots of ways to get your information into it as well as get your information out.
So the second aspect that I would like to go over is usually pro apps, they both on iOS and macOS, they tend to take advantage of native platform integrations as much as possible. So whether it's using the latest APIs on iOS 12 or iOS 11 last year, I think we saw this to great extent with drag and drop and the files APIs, for example, or whether it's about digging deep into the GPU optimization or taking advantage of Metal, for example, on the Mac. Usually pro apps, they tend to do as much as possible to extract all the value they can get out of the platform, and also to be consistent with the platform and to use native features and to use native APIs and to use interfaces that are consistent with what people expect from the platform. And a few examples here could be the Affinity series of apps, Affinity Photo and Affinity Designer, taking advantage of the hardware of the iPad Pro, and of course Workflow and Shortcuts. They are the prime example of it. They're basically apps built around integrations, native actions for iOS. But also you mentioned PDF Viewer and the files integration. That's a great example of an API that launched last year. The developers of PDF Viewer completely embraced files by making it the launch screen of the app. And also, I wanted to call out OpenTerm. OpenTerm is a terminal app for iOS. I know that it doesn't probably make sense, a terminal on iOS, but it's this wild idea of rethinking the shell for integration with iOS. So you can do things like reading the contents of the clipboard or saving files into specific locations using the files integration on iOS 11. It's a crazy idea, but it totally works. And I think it's a great example of taking an old concept of by definition, the terminal is the pro tool and making it more accessible and integrated with iOS.
Yeah, my Note is another one that comes to mind for me too, because that uses the files integration. And, a lot of these apps had their own systems beforehand, and they pulled those out and they went with the system version because it's frankly more familiar and easier once people got used to iOS 11. And I think, as much work probably went into that for those developers, I think it's the right move to go with things like the files integration. Thanks to Daylight for sponsoring App Stories this week. Daylight helps you do 4 key things so your business runs smoother. First of all, Daylight helps you manage and build relationships by remembering every single detail about the people and companies you interact with. Second, it helps you execute on plans and projects so you can meet your deadlines on time. Third, Daylight helps you close more deals by streamlining your sales process so you can remember to follow up with every single lead. And finally, it helps you scale your business by allowing your different teams to share information and prioritize what's most important. Here's the thing. Daylight is not a web app. It's a true native app on the Mac, iPhone, and iPad that syncs with the cloud so you get the best of both worlds. Cloud backend so you can sync anywhere, and offline access. Specifically designed for Apple devices so you can integrate with Apple Mail on your Mac and leverage features like Siri and Caller ID on your iPhone. Daylight is made for teams of 1 to 50. It helps you keep everything in one place so nothing slips through the cracks. Your company's contacts, calendars, projects, sales opportunities, emails, notes, tasks, they're all there, you name it, in one place and shared with your team. On top of integrating with Apple Mail, Apple Contacts, and calendars, Daylight also integrates with Zapier so you can connect Daylight to other tools you use like MailChimp, Slack, and online web forms, allowing you to automate your workflows and save time. If you haven't checked out Daylight before, Use the link in the show notes to let them know you came from App Stories and support the show. Thanks again to Daylight for sponsoring App Stories.
So the next point, and this is something that we continue to bring up on the show every few episodes.
Yes.
Simple question: is it customizable enough? So pro apps usually, and the best pro apps, they allow you to completely take control of the experience and customize different aspects of the app itself. So whether it's the UI, and you can choose between multiple themes, or you can customize even the icon or the menus, or maybe you can create smart folders or saved searches. Maybe you can come up with your own filters to only display a subset of your documents. Maybe you can create your own scripts, you can create your own keyboard shortcuts. And this is true both on iOS and macOS. But I think the best pro apps, they offer you customization options, and they offer you tons of settings that you can change to make sure that the experience is perfectly tailored to your needs and to your taste. And it's easy to go a little overboard with these settings. I mean, if you look at apps such as iCab, or perhaps even Good Task, which is a reminders client that I mentioned on Mac Stories, I think it's easy to go a little too far in that direction and making it too difficult for users to sort of find their way around all of these different personalization options. But I think in the end, it's always best to have too many settings. And let me contextualize this. I'm not advocating for feature creep or for making apps too complex, but when you're dealing with a powerful tool, when you're dealing, when you have a lab, essentially, with all the possible instruments that you use for your most important work, you want to be able to control everything. And so when I'm using pro apps, especially on my iPad, even though it takes a bit of a learning curve, and this is another point that I'm going to make in a few minutes, I always prefer when an application allows me to get down to the smallest details and change and customize and make it more personal for me.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, although I guess I would push back just a little bit and say I think that there's a careful balance that has to be reached there, because it is possible to go overboard and have settings for the sake of settings. And I also think it depends on the app, because there are a lot of single-purpose utilities that I use that really don't need a ton of settings because they're just simple utilities on iOS. And I would still consider them pro apps because they're the kinds of things that help me get work done, but they don't really need a whole lot of customization.
Yeah, and also I wanted to call out To Do, which is another task manager that I used to use years ago. Airmail, perhaps another example of this careful balance between offering settings and perhaps too many of them. And also Keep It, which is the database sort of manager that I've been using lately to organize my research material for the iOS 12 review. And even though it doesn't have the iOS version I'm talking about, even though it doesn't have all of the features of the Mac version, it does include powerful options such as saved searches and labels and filters and URL schema automation.
Right.
So definitely one of the examples here. Speaking of which, pro apps usually support automation. They offer keyboard commands or other types of shortcuts to save time. I don't think I need to provide any further explanation here, but the general sense is that when you're using a pro app that is a complex one, has tons of options, many different types of menus and sub-menus, the more time you can save, the better it is. And there's always, whether you're working on a MacBook Pro or on an iPad Pro, usually I'm pretty sure you can find certain aspects of your workflow that you can speed up with automation. Excellent examples here on iOS would be all of the apps by the Omni Group. They have actual JavaScript automation. In addition to X callback URL automation, they have JavaScript, and they're working with the grandmaster of automation, Sal Sagoyan. Used to work at Apple. He's the creator, I think, of AppleScript and Automator. And now he's consulting for the Omni Group for their Omni.js, I think it's called, their JavaScript implementation. Of course, Drafts 5 by Greg Pierce, excellent combination of visual actions and scripting, which was inspired by, in a way, maybe by Editorial, which is the text editor. I don't think it's supported anymore, but it's still working on iOS 12. Of course, shortcuts. It's the new workflow, so of course it's
right.
It is an automation app in itself. And also, I wanted to mention OneWriter, which is a text editor for iOS that supports lightweight but still customizable enough JavaScript automation and keyboard shortcuts, and also Fiery Feeds, which is an RSS reader for iOS that supports keyboard shortcuts on iPad and also allows you to create your own URL-based actions to share articles with other apps.
Yeah, I'd say of all these automation things that you've raised, the one that drives me a little bit crazy is that I still feel like there are not enough iOS apps that are supporting keyboard shortcuts, extensive keyboard shortcuts beyond just, a handful of small default ones. It's something that I think anybody who's used a keyboard with an iOS device for any length of time has that moment where they're in an app and they're just touching the screen more than they should have to, and it slows them down.
Yeah, I know. Last 2 points, John.
Okay.
If you're using a Pro app, pay attention to whether it comes with extensive documentation,
right,
or perhaps a manual, or in-app help tools that help you explain that explain and help you understand how the app works. Or maybe the developers have community forum board where you can talk with other users and exchange tips and tricks to use the app. Because really, Pro apps, they tend to have, as I mentioned before, a bit of a learning curve. You need to play around with them for a while before you can really master them, and you can really understand how you can take advantage of every single feature that they offer. They're complex because they solve complex problems. And I think one way to appreciate the work that developers put into Pro apps is to download the documentation that they offer. And there's always been one company has always been really at the forefront of this approach, and that would be the folks that make BBEdit, Barebone software. BBEdit is one of the best documentations that I've ever seen for any app on any platform. But also, I wanna mention again the Omni Group. They do provide you with ebook versions of documentation for OmniGraffle and OmniFocus and OmniOutliner that you can even download from the iBook store, of all places. You can go there and download the manual. And also the Affinity apps, they come with a rich website that has all kinds of help tools. Not sure if it's got forums, but I think it's definitely got a manual and a walkthrough that explains all of the different features of Designer and Photo. So yeah, using documentation is one of my favorite aspects of evaluating these types of apps.
Yeah, I would mention just a few more, which are DevonThink again, because they've done something very similar to the Omni Group. You can download ebooks of their manuals, which are very helpful. Drafts has a great community that are making actions that you can get from Agile Tortoise's website. That's another great one. And I was going to mention Pixelmator Pro and Pixelmator on iOS too, because there are a lot of great tutorials on that website. It's a great way to kind of start learning how to use those apps, because especially on the Mac, Pixelmator has become a really capable image editor. All right, so what's the last point you want to make, Federico?
So the last point is, when you're looking at a Pro app, doesn't matter the platform, ask yourself, is it priced with sustainability in mind? Are these developers going to be around for a long time? Because as we talked about in this episode, you're going to be using a Pro app to do your most important work. You're going to rely on it. You're going to spend time in the app because you need to learn the app, because perhaps over time you're going to automate the app, and you're going to, come up with your own little techniques and little scripts and little shortcuts to use the app. But ultimately, that doesn't matter if you wake up one morning and the app is gone because the developers made no money and couldn't find sustainability for the app. So I think it's important to consider when you're going to trust an app with your work, with your time, and with your patience, because it takes patience to learn these apps. Also try to consider whether or not the developers of the app have a plan to be around for a long time. And that plan can be anything. It can be subscriptions, it can be multiple in-app purchases, it can be paid upfront price. It's more of a question of trying to understand if the developer of an app that is seemingly a pro one is in it for the long term, or if they just hope to make a quick buck and disappear, in a couple of months.
Right.
And we've seen too many examples of apps that tried to do a lot all at once for the first release and disappeared because after a few months, the developers just, they just found out that it wasn't worth it and that they were not making enough money. So this is possibly the most difficult aspect to consider. I mean, 5 years ago, I built, hundreds of workflows in editorial. And now editorial, it's not gone from the App Store, but it hasn't received meaningful upgrades in years. And that's definitely been a question on my mind of the next time that I'm going to trust an app. And the last example has been workflow. And thankfully that worked out okay because Apple acquired it.
Yeah, right.
But especially, after these two cases of editorial and workflow, when I start getting really deep into an app, I always ask myself, am I investing the time in an application that is going to be around for a long, long time? Or am I just wasting time in an app that could be gone tomorrow? So
right.
I don't have a perfect answer for this, but it's definitely something that's always on my mind.
Yeah, it's on my mind too. And it's the reason why you'll find that if someone really relies on an app, they won't mind that it's gone subscription. Ulysses went to a subscription model last fall, and I was really glad to see that because it wasn't clear that Ulysses had a sustainable model as it was. But now I feel a lot more confident that they're going to be around for the long haul.
So I think what we've discussed here is more of a framework that we can use and our listeners can use when they're dealing with pro apps to sort of try and understand if they're really using a type of application that can scale over time or not. I think ultimately it's all about, as you mentioned, it's all about the flexibility and the sense of whether you're using a product that can scale over time and for your needs. That's those two are the most important aspects.
Right.
Whether you're using an app that can be with you and help you with your work for multiple years going forward, and whether that app can work for you. Nobody wants to use an app that that they hate. Sometimes we're forced to use apps that are ugly or because there's no alternative. But I think especially on iOS, now there's such a rich ecosystem of productivity apps and pro apps. That's why I wanted to talk to this topic is so interesting for me because I think especially in the past few years, we've seen more pro apps come to iOS than ever before. And that might have been, a consequence of the iPad Pro, or it could have been a consequence of iOS 9 and then iOS 11.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we're reaching a point where it's equally possible to have a pro app on iOS as it is on macOS. And no matter the platform, though, I think all of these points are valid in that it is possible to have a pro app on the Mac that doesn't sell enough copies and doesn't last for more than a year as it is possible on iOS. And it's possible to run into mistakes for example, not having enough customization on the Mac as it is on the iPad Pro. Especially with iPad apps coming to the Mac in the future, I think we will see some kind of unification of the idea of what it means to be a pro user and what it means to use pro apps, which will definitely be interesting to see how developers approach this shift in, it's not just making serious apps for the Mac and simple apps for iOS anymore, as much as it is I'm making a single powerful app for Apple platforms. That will be interesting to see.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I think we are seeing kind of a unification, not only of the underlying technologies that allow these iPad apps to come over to the Mac, but I think that having that foundation unified is also going to force developers to rethink what it means to be a pro app and what it means to be an app that's an app not just for iOS or the Mac, but an app for both, which is going to be really interesting. I think that's a pretty good place to stop for today, don't you think, Federico?
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, thanks again to our sponsors for today. That's Linode and Daylight for making this episode possible. And as always, you can find me and Federico over at macstories.net. He's Vitici on Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.